Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be in slightly less than sunny Portugal than I expected. But I went on a presentation skills course once and they said, what you should never do is you should never start off a presentation with an apology. But I think I'm going to have to do that this morning. Unfortunately, not only do I not speak any Portuguese, I come from South London, so I have a dodgy South London accent as well. And so if I say anything and you think, well, Steve, that sounds like English, but I have no idea what you're talking about, would you just put your hand up? I'm going to try to speak more slowly, and I'm going to try to explain things properly in stuff that's easy to understand. When I was about 21, I could speak almost fluent French, and I went on a training course in French, and within about 15 minutes, I thought my head was going to explode. So I have shared your pain, but I'm not currently sharing it. Now, the truth of the matter is, I've come to the conclusion that you probably don't really care about me, do you? You're probably more interested in what difference I can make to you and your business. Would that be a fair assessment? Yes. Yeah, because I had a terrible childhood, right? And so I'm always looking for constant reassurance from people around me. So if you could nod, smile, or at least just don't go to sleep, that would be fantastic. Now, I heard, when I was listening to some of the other questions from the other speaker this morning, people were talking a lot about closing stuff, selling, and stuff like that. Now, I can talk about that as well, but I'd just like to get a sense check, because I don't want anyone coming here thinking, we came here to learn about negotiation, and Steve's robbed us. He didn't talk much about that, he talked about selling. Could I just have a show of hands? Who would like me to cover some stuff about closing deals as well? So most people just want to hear about negotiation, is that fair? Choice of two here, ladies and gentlemen. Negotiation or selling. Show of hands, who would like me to cover off selling? What's the difference? Good question, very good question. If you sell right, you don't have to negotiate. That's probably the most subtle difference. So shall I just busk it and see how we get on, and if you like it, and if you don't, you don't?
Yeah,
right.
Sure.
Okay. Now, people buy things for one of three reasons. They want it, they need it, or it addresses a problem that they've got. Can anybody else think of any reasons why people buy things other than one of those three? I'll give you an example. Yeah, but that's actually... Yeah, well, if you look at why my wife buys shoes, she's got more shoes than Imelda Marcos. If she started wearing them today and wore a different pair every day, she would not wear all the shoes she's got before the day that I die. So she only buys them because she wants them. I'm an early adopter. I've got a garage full of technical stuff that I buy, which if I waited 6 weeks, it would have been half the price and worked with other things as well. And they go in the bin. But the problem is, two things happen. Is if you can focus on the problem that the customer's got, two things happen. Urgency to act increases, but probably as important, resistance to price goes down. Let me give you an example. About 3 years ago, I charge, not today, but usually I charge quite a lot for what I do. So I think I need to have decent equipment wherever I go. And I had a laptop, and the laptop was getting a little bit, in England we could say long in the tooth. Probably old is a better way of just explaining that. And I thought I need to go and get another laptop. So at this point, what was my resistance to price like? Pretty high, because I'm going around, I'm looking on the internet, I'm going into shops. Do you remember when we used to have shops, but mainly on the internet? And I thought, I need to get this sorted out in the next couple of weeks, I need to get a new laptop. And then I was doing a presentation at the NEC, that's a big conference centre in Birmingham, and there were 200 people in the audience, and I was showing a video, and it froze in the middle. And have you ever stood there when there's 200 people looking at you while you're trying to restart a computer and all this stuff comes up which sounds like English but I have no idea what it means, trying to connect to the local host, unable to find this, can't find that, and I'm thinking, I just want the ground to open up and swallow me, and I just wanted to die. So at this point I thought, this cannot continue, this will never happen to me again, I need to replace this as a matter of some urgency. Well, that evening I had to go over to Ireland. And I went down to Southampton and I got there with Flyby and I had my case with me, my little laptop bag. They said, that weighs more than 10 kilos. I said, yeah, but it's got a laptop in it. That weighs more than 10 kilos, but it's got a, okay. We'll stick, they've got these stickers that they put on to instruct the baggage handlers to kick them all around the floor. It says fragile. I don't know, you probably have the same sort of thing in Portugal. It's going to be a tough audience, actually. That's half of my jokes gone. Didn't even get a smile for the second one. So they stuck this fragile one on, and I got off the plane, and I went to my hotel in Dublin, and I opened up my laptop, and the screen went, tsh, and I thought, ah. So at that point, what was my resistance to price? Pretty limited. I paid £1,200, and this was 6 years ago, for a PC that should have cost me about 500. So when you're selling things to people, you need to talk about what sort of issues they've got that you can resolve for them. Best way to find that is ask them questions. Early on in my career, I spent most of my career in buying. So I've sat on the receiving end of the most tedious presentations you can possibly remember, where what might have been better is if people just emailed them to me and I read them and they didn't even come in and talk to me. And nobody listened. All they do is they come in and say, let me tell you about us. This is about us. This is about us. I didn't care. All I cared is what difference I made to other people. Now, to some extent, you don't know me from Adam, another colloquialism. I'll try and avoid colloquialism. You don't know me. You've never met me before. So what we've done is we've told you some stuff about me to try to demonstrate that I might not be a complete idiot and I might know a bit about it. So you've got to tell them something to suggest that you know what you're talking about, but don't spend too much time on it. So, I mean, I've seen presentations where people say, we've got factories in 17 countries, we've been trading since 1917, and the person who founded it still, no, I really don't care. So bear that in mind when you're presenting things to customers. So the first stage of selling is identify what their want, need and problem is, and then summarise it for them. But summarise it using their words. What you're trying to do is get them to tell you what the problem is. Now, if I'm selling negotiation consultancy, I go in and I go to see the customers and say, okay, now you've got me in because I'm assuming something's not happening that you'd like to happen, or something is happening that you'd like to stop. And then they tell me. So the best way of trying to figure out what the problems are is just ask them, and generally they will tell you. Now, when you summarise a situation, you need to use their words. So don't paraphrase what they've said, use the words that they've used, because it helps maintain this pain that they've told you. If you think about certain words that have an emotional charge on, now up to about 3 or 4 years ago, if you told me I was wrong, if you said to me, Steve, you're wrong, I would have hit you over the head with a chair. That was before I had all the therapy. But if you'd said to me, Steve, you're clueless, you don't know what you're talking about, and your wife's ugly, we would have carried on having a conversation at a normal level. Now, the reason was, I worked with a guy, and you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, all the time. So every time somebody said that to me before the therapy, it used to really, well, in England we say, do my head in, but you get the drift. So use words that they use, because they may have some emotional attachment to them. And don't exaggerate what they say, and don't minimise what they say. If they say, we've got a problem with ... don't repeat it back, you said you've got an issue with ... If they say, we have an issue with ... don't say, you've got a problem with ... So don't minimise what they say or don't exaggerate it. We're still all on the same page. Alles klar, as we would say if we were in Germany? Yeah. Excellent. Sehr good. That's about the extent of I can do bon dia, bonjour, alles klar, and that's about it. I'm a true European, or true English person. Right, so summarise, we just speak louder, don't we? That's how it works. So summarise the situation. The next thing to do is state your idea in broad terms. So we've got a way that you can ... So just really, really top line. And this is well worth practicing to explain to people what you've got that's different, and then explain how it works. What most people do is they start selling here, and you shouldn't start selling there until you've identified what's going on. Still, everybody okay with that? Nods would be okay? Great. The fifth one is reinforce the benefits. Now, Neil Rackham, in his book called Spin Selling, talks about type 1 benefits and type 2 benefits. Type 1 benefits are things that we would call advantages, right? So if we look at my watch, for instance, could someone tell me what some of the advantages are of my watch?
Could you repeat that?
Pardon?
Could you repeat what you said?
Yes, of course. So, yeah, an advantage is it tells the time. So, advantages are why it's better than other similar things, right? So it could be... Pardon?
Have some biometrics there?
Yes, it has. It's got biomedics. I like that. High five. I mean, I've got some empathy. Right. So it's got biomedics on it. It's got a really, really nice strap. It's a nicer strap than you can get anywhere else, etc., etc., etc. But the biomedics are only interesting if I really need biomedics. If I just wanted one to impress the ladies, that's probably not going to do it, is it? I would have worn my Rolex. Right. So what he talks about is he talks about type 2 benefits, which are things that your presentation, your product does that addresses the issue that they've told you. Everybody with me? Right. And the last thing, do you know, what's the reason most people don't get orders from customers? They don't ask for them. That's the main reason they don't get orders. I was in buying for about 25 years, and most people's idea of closing the deal was, well, Steve, I'll leave it with you, right? Which falls a little bit short of what I would expect. But I don't know about you, but do you like this really in your face? You know, would you like half delivered on Monday and the rest on Tuesday, or should we deliver it all on Monday? Or if I had a product that did ... you'd buy that, wouldn't you? Or some of these really, I'd call them double glazing kind of closes. Do you like people doing that to you? Choice of two answers there. Yes, Steve, we do. No, Steve, we don't. Anybody here that does like that? Because I could get you some therapy after the session, right? But most people don't like this in-your-face attempts to sell, do we? None of us do. But what we think is our customers probably will. And why is that? Because they're not proper people, is that why? So the issue here is, can you turn this round so the customer is buying from you rather than you're selling to them? So if I'm selling to people, I would normally end the meeting with, okay, what would you like me to do now? So rather than, would you like to do this? What would you like to do? And then let them tell you. You've then got the choice of either trying to address some of the problems that they put forward, or alternatively, you could just get your stuff and not bother going there again and saving the fuel for next time round. But Rackham also, so action-based close. What are you going to do? Action-based. Rackham also talked about the difference when you're planning for a meeting between advances and continuances. Now, I don't know whether and it sounded like some of you are going to see the same potential customer again and again and again and again and getting nowhere because they're big. Would that be true? So potentially they're big, so let's keep going to see them. When I had this food brokerage, I used to sell jam. Right, and I know what you're thinking. We've got the top man here, right? I used to sell jam, and there's a big retailer in the UK called Waitrose, and we were trying to sell them own private label jam, so jam with Waitrose label on it. I used to go and see this guy called Richard Hind, and I'd take in samples, and he'd say, it's not red enough. So I'd go back to the factory, put more red in there, and say, too sweet. So I'd go back to the factory, take the sugar out, take it back again. There's not enough solids in it, and this went on 2 years. This went on, and in the end, I just thought I'm going to have to ask him. I said, "Look, Richard, if you don't want it, right, it's okay, right? My kids are still going to eat. It's not. It really isn't the end of the world. No, Steve. No, we do want it, but it needs to be a bit more red, right?" And so, luckily, he got fired, and I went to see the person that took over from him and said, "Right, well, we've done this with Richard. This is the situation." He said, "Yes, great. Can you put more strawberries in?" I thought, probably spend our time doing something else. So what you have to do is you have to identify, are you kidding yourself that it's worth wasting fuel to go and see these people? And big customers are worse because you're thinking, they're probably a good opportunity. And it was like when I had guys working for me and they come back and say, how did you get on today with the people you went to see? Or had a good meeting. I said, yeah, I didn't sell anything either. Right, so those are the sort of conversations that we had. So be really, really clear about what constitutes a good meeting. Am I talking too fast? Okay, good. Right, so I'll move on to, we'll talk a little bit about negotiation, right? So I'm positing that there are 5 commandments for negotiating commercial deals, right? And here's the first one. The first one is only believe things that are true. And I'll go into this in a little bit more detail. But has anybody seen that American lunatic, Tony Robbins, who does all the motivational stuff? Anybody seen him? He's about 19 foot tall. He's a marketeer par excellence. He's got like about half an hour's material that he drags out into 13-hour DVDs, and then he does another one the following year with the same material but called something like Awaken the Giant Within or something like that, but he just regurgitates the same stuff. Marketeer par excellence. But he talks about, a lot of the time what people do is driven by fear, and what he says is, he says fear stands for, I'll try the American. He says, it stands for false expectation appearing real. Right. And if you think about it, I mean, and I work a lot with buyers, and I say to them, you know when you threaten suppliers that you're going to kick them out, you're going to stop buying from them, how often do you do it? Well, about 1 in 10. The trouble is, what happens is, if they do it, it can be quite devastating. But what a lot of people do is they're sitting there thinking, I'm going to get thrown out. And it very, very rarely happens. Most people are, what buyers want to do is what they did yesterday, but with a slightly better profit margin. That's what they want to do because they're quite lazy generally. So the first one is only believe things that are true. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that in a minute, if I can figure out how this works. The second one is plan properly. Now, bearing in mind that a lot of you are selling reasonably complex ideas or solutions, is that fair to say? So you know a lot about your stuff. You ought to know a lot about your stuff. At least you persuaded PV that you know a lot about your stuff, which is, so at least you've made one decent sale so far, right? And so what most people do, buyers in particular, their idea of planning is let's get the supplier or the vendor in and see what they've got to say, right? That's their idea of planning for a meeting. That falls a little bit short of what I would expect. And in a minute, I'm going to make us some suggestions on how we might plan quickly and efficiently for negotiations. The second is you need to understand the decision-making process. Most people think they understand the decision-making process in their prospects or their customers, and most people don't. They have no idea how it works. The fourth is alter the balance of power before it's too late. When we go to negotiate, you believe some things about what I'm likely to do. Agreed? All of you. Remember my poor childhood. I need the reinforcement, right? So you believe some things, and if I say to you, actually, that's not true, does he believe me now? No, he doesn't, right? So me telling him it's not true doesn't actually persuade him. So the issue is, if you want to alter the balance of power, you have to do it before the negotiation starts. It's too late to tell him when the negotiation starts. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. And the fifth is, this is a bit of a, it doesn't feel like it because you're sitting there thinking, I wonder if I'm still going to have my house at the end of the year. It doesn't feel like a game, but it is a game to some extent with particular rules, and I'll go through that as well. So only believe things that are true. Now, I'm afraid this people who buy more pay less is just not true. I work with a number of very, very large, fast-moving consumer goods manufacturers, and the first question I ask them is, do you have defensible trading terms? So do people who buy broadly the same amount of stuff pay broadly the same price? And every single one of them says no. And then when I say, well, okay, who buys the best? They would generally say the people that put us under the most pressure. Now, that's not people who bang on the table and shout and scream. It's people who think, right, how can we exert pressure on these people and do it thoughtfully? Now, I'm assuming you don't charge everybody the same for what you're doing, do you? Don't want to be drawn on that, Steve. That's a little bit too... But most manufacturers don't. The second thing is loyalty gets you better prices. It doesn't generally. A long time ago, I used to sell frozen ready meals that we imported from America. And in the UK, there were two big companies. One was called QuickSave, who were a bit like Aldi and Lidl, but making much, much higher margins, and another company called Summerfield. And QuickSave were a reasonably small customer of ours, and Summerfield were a very, very big, sorry, the other way around. QuickSave were a big customer of ours, Summerfield were a small company, small customer. And Summerfield acquired QuickSave, and I went down to Summerfield Towers for the ritual kick-in about discrepancy in the terms. And I sat down there, and I was holding it together reasonably well. So there was a buyer from Summerfield there, the buyer for QuickSave, and they're really having a go at me, and I'm coping okay. And then the guy from QuickSave said, "Why, we're a third of your business, why didn't you give us the same terms that Summerfield get?" And to this day, I've never forgiven myself for this, because you didn't ask me. Right? So what I liked about that was it was true and it was honest. What I didn't like about it is it sounded terminally naive in retrospect. Detailed tenders drive the best deals and large suppliers are more reliable. That really isn't true. What you have, particularly in the UK, you have the same 2 or 3 large crap. Is crap all right? Is this, anyone know what crap is? Usually those are sort of the words that people learn in foreign languages first, aren't they? But you have the same crap suppliers that, because their people are prepared to spend loads and loads of time doing these tenders, that they get business over and above other people. Because if you're reasonably small organisations with reasonably small amounts of resources, agreed? Generally that's the case. You haven't got time to spend 6-man weeks doing some long, complicated tender on the off chance of perhaps a 1 in 20 possibility of winning the business, have you? You just can't do it. So that's why the big companies win it. My wife used to work for a car leasing company. They had a whole department who only did leases, only did tender requests. And they found that they were only winning about 1 in 10 of the tenders that they put in. And of those tenders, about 70% of those were companies who they currently did business with, and they were really just benchmarking them against other people. So they shut down the tender department, said we're not going to do it anymore, made more money. So sometimes that's not a good idea. Now this role rejection, this is one of the key things that people, they think, well, I'm not actually a salesman, really. I'm the chief technology officer, or I'm an accountant. I'm actually a management consultant, right? I'm an advisor. Thing is, if you have to bring money in by selling stuff to people, whatever you want to call yourself, you just need to get over yourself and realise that your job is to sell, however much you don't want to. Because I know what, your mum and dad probably didn't want you to grow up being a salesman, did they? My mum and dad didn't want me to grow up being a salesman, but unfortunately you have to get over it because you make more money if you sell well. Customers always right. I thought, right, now bearing in mind this is all in English, I thought what I'm going to do to show some intercultural sensitivity is, I thought that's a dodgy word. I better look that up in my little trusty little English-Portuguese dictionary, because no one's going to know what that means. And then I found out it's a very similar word in Portuguese, yeah. So, but at least I tried, to be fair, didn't I? So the customer's always right. The customer's not always right, but a customer's always a customer. That's the thing that you need to bear in mind. And what I see is people say, so many times I see people at the end of the meeting, they'll say to customers, thanks for your time, right? Now, I think if you're doing this all the time, your mind's in the wrong place. No one's doing anyone a favour here. This is an exchange of goods or services for money, right? Isn't that what's going on? They're not doing you a favour, you're not doing them a favour. They buy from you because they think you can make a difference to their business. You sell to them because you think there's a fighting chance they're going to pay you for the fruits of your labour, right? Now, people say to me, yeah, but the thing is though, Steve, it's polite, isn't it? And I guess it is polite, but it's very subservient. So they say to me, well, what should you say instead? Easy for me to say that. What should you say instead? What should you say instead, Steve? I said, why don't you say something like, it's great to meet you, really enjoyed talking to you, hope we'll be able to do some business. All of those convey the same feeling, but it doesn't say they're more important than you. And it's a bit like, you know, sometimes when people keep you waiting and they say, sorry to keep you waiting, and we all say, that's all right, don't mention it, that's all right. It's not all right, is it? So we've already started off by lying to our customers, which doesn't bode well. And I remember a while ago, quite a long while ago, I used to call on a company called Safeway. And the bloke there was, I had a good word for that, but as it's on camera, I won't use it. But he wasn't very nice. But every time I went there, he used to keep me waiting for about 45 minutes, every time. And one day, I was in the middle of getting divorced, and the balance of my mind was disturbed. And so he kept me waiting for the statutory 45 minutes, and I go up in the lift to the 4th floor, and the door's open, and he said, "Sorry to keep you waiting, Steve." And I said, "No, you're not," right? And he starts walking towards his office. He said, what did you say? I said, "No, you're not, Trevor." I said, "You do this every single time I come here, right? But here's the deal. Either don't do it or don't apologise. Either of those works for me." Now, I fully accept that's a reasonably high-risk strategy. But after that, he never kept me waiting. I saw him take other suppliers downstairs so he could meet me on time. He used to take new products on, but I do fully accept that sometimes people that bully you tend to be quite capable of following up with the bullying threats as well. But what I do is when people say sorry to keep you waiting, I don't ever say it's okay. If it's people I know and I've known them a while, I'll give them my cheesiest grin and say, "Oh, what's been going on then?" So it's not actually, you're not actually, and some other people go, "That's all right," meaning, no, it's not. And there's a company that do negotiation training in the UK called the Gap Partnership. And one of the things they say is you should always keep people waiting for 10 minutes because it gives you an edge. Really? The best edge you can get over me is keep me waiting for 10 minutes. Really? Anyway, thanks for listening to that. They'll move their business, particularly if we increase our prices. Things go up in price, don't they? I made a fortune a couple of years ago about helping people negotiate price increases with major retailers because they're scared of it. In a final analysis, what it comes down to is you set the prices for the products that you sell, they decide whether they buy them, and normally they don't stop buying from you, unless your product is marginal to start with. If there's a customer demand or consumer demand for your product, they don't normally kick you out. Making concessions creates goodwill. A lot of people manage to fool themselves that that's true. It's a bit like throwing steaks to a tiger, hoping they're going to become a vegetarian, right? What you're going to do is you're just reinforcing that if people put you under pressure, you're going to give them stuff. It doesn't create goodwill. You'll close more sales if you have more authority. Well, let's just say, for instance, that we're negotiating and you're empowered to make the decision for your business, which I guess you probably are you? Because you're like the big cheese, aren't you? Or the grand fromage, or die grosse Käse. Is that? No, wasted. Right. Okay, but you can make the decision, and I'm on the other side of the table, and I can't make the decision on behalf of my company. Who's got the power? You. Yeah, because whatever pressure you put me under, I have to say no. If I put you under the right pressure, you'll say yes, and that isn't because you're not any good, it's because that's what we do to close deals where we've got empowerment. So the key thing to do is you might have to say, well, I'm going to have to go back to the other shareholders before we start making concessions, or anything to make it that it's not you that makes the decision. And the last thing, we need to safeguard the relationship. Right now, I worry about this because I don't want people just to like me. I want them to buy things from me so I make money on it. It's great if they like me. If they hate me, but I can still have a bigger house and a bigger car, that's okay with me. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not with you. But if you look at how people deal with conflict, you can look at it on two dimensions. On this dimension, you've got how bothered they are about the relationship. And on this one, you've got how bothered they are about the substance or the outcome of the deal. So this is what is the deal about. This is about how are we getting on. Now, you usually go on these seminars and everything's like 2x2 boxes and guess my list, isn't it? This isn't any different. But I'm going to give you 25% extra free. I'm going to put an extra box in the middle so it doesn't look like a 2x2 box. That usually gets a chuckle. Obviously, Portugal is a much tougher environment to to negotiate. Now up here, you've got people that are highly competitive, and they'll say things like, I'm going to get what I want, and do you know what? If I get what I want at your expense, I don't care. How might that behaviour be described by other people? Aggressive is the most usual one. Aggressive, dictatorial, pushy, selfish, but aggressive is the most usual one. And Lee Thompson in her research found there are 2 times when people are more likely to be aggressive than others. And the first is when they can't see you. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where somebody's been on the telephone and they've been really laying into you, and you thought, I'm going to have to go and talk to them about that. I can't leave it like this. And you go in and say, oh, hello, come have a cup of tea. Right? And you think, what happened there? So 2 things here is, if they're being horrible to you on the phone, that may be just because people do that. Would you like to work in a call centre? I don't think so. I can't imagine anything worse. Right. So that's the first time. The second time is she referred to it as having another stakeholder in the room. So someone else who has an interest in the outcome of the negotiation. My mum calls it showing off in front of your friends. Right. So those are the 2 times. And I've had account managers selling to me who I've thought I had a decent relationship with. They come in with their boss and suddenly they just want to fight. Right, and they think, well, it's a bit childish. Well, so A, don't let people do it to you, and B, don't do it to them. The other thing Thompson found was that if you negotiate on your own against a group of people, right, so a group being 2 or more, you typically take 30% less. So don't negotiate on your own against a group of people. Now, that's not to say that this is not about there's only 2 of you and you've got all the Benfica first team and all the reserves. That's fine. It's not about being outnumbered. It's about if you're on your own. So don't negotiate against a group of people when you're on your own. She said the other thing, if people use humour, then often they can get away with being competitive. So but you're really pleased you sat in the front, aren't you? Right. If I said, look, you need to give me another 5%, how would you label that behaviour? Aggressive? Aggressive? If I said, come on, look. I've known you for ages. You know you're going to give me the money. I know you're going to give me the money. Why have we got to go through all this? Just give me the money, right? How would you describe that behaviour? You wouldn't describe it as aggressive, would you? But it is clearly aggressive, because the thing about aggression is I'm claiming value at your expense. That is aggressive behaviour. The fact that it doesn't look overtly aggressive doesn't stop it being aggressive. All okay with that? Right. Now down here, you've got the people that won't force through what they want, but they won't let you force through what you want. And when it gets difficult, they start to avoid the conflict. Now, these people can be called passive aggressives. These are the people that they won't confront you to your face, but what they'll do is if you've left your car in the car park, they'll let the tyres down. As long as there's no CCTV and they nobody can see you. Right? So they're the passive aggressives. In this corner, there's the people that are highly accommodating. These are the people, the relationship's everything. The relationship's more important than the deal. These people are really, really easy to manipulate. Because if I come up against someone that's equally competitive and I start using really competitive behaviours, and they're competitive as well, what's the most likely thing to happen? It's going to be a punch-up, isn't there? And you're going to end up probably in a deadlock situation. Is deadlock okay as a word? Yeah. You're probably going to end up in a deadlock situation where the deal's not going to go anywhere. Because the problem with these people is they don't care about getting the right deal. They just want to win. And winning becomes far too important. So if you come up against someone that's not ultra competitive, what often you'll do is you'll get this avoid behaviour. If you start being unpleasant to people, they'll think, I'm not going to ring him, I'm not going to go and see her, I'm just going to pull back from this negotiation. And much, much more effective is if you use competitive behaviours against accommodating people. Say, well, you do realise if you don't give me the 5%, how that's going to damage our relationship, don't you? Right. And that is far more likely to be able to manipulate people than doing the overtly aggressive. So Remember, if people are doing that to you, if they keep talking about a relationship, they're trying to manipulate you. Now, in the middle, you've got the compromisers. What compromisers do is they'll give away some stuff that's reasonably important to them, as long as you give away some stuff that's reasonably important to you, so you're both equally fed up with the outcome, but it looks fair, right? Now, the problem is, once people realise that the primary way you deal with conflict is to compromise, what they'll do is they'll just ask you for more, because compromisers split the difference. So you start there, I start there, it finishes up in the middle if we both compromise. All okay with that description? The reason people use compromising mainly to deal with conflict in negotiation terms is because it's very efficient and it's very quick, and it's a cultural norm. That's what people tend to do. Now up here, we've got the people who they refer to as collaborative. Some people call this win, pass me the sick bag. That was another joke. That obviously wasn't lack of anything funny in that one as well. The thing about, I don't know if you've noticed this, but certainly over the last couple of years, people are becoming more and more happy to win at my expense. They're becoming less and less, there's not even any pretense of collaboration. They just want what they want. Are you seeing that? Yeah, okay. So the thing is, and also they'll try and, if you don't give in, right, so if you're not accommodating them, they'll say, you've stopped collaborating with us, haven't you? By collaborate, I mean you give them everything that they want, but that isn't a definition of collaboration. When you collaborate with people, you have needs that have got to be met, and I have needs that have got to be met as well. I don't give up anything that's important to me, and I don't expect you to either, so we have to spend a lot more time trying to figure out what will actually work for everybody. Any questions on this?
I have a question. Do you see often negotiators that transition between these profiles?
Well, bear in mind, I'll tell you what, if you are interested, are we allowed to use Brazilian Portuguese over here? Or does everyone get everyone annoyed about that? No. There's a rather catchily named psychometric called the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument, right? But it's available mainly in English, but there is a Brazilian Portuguese version available as well. And it's about 15 or 20 euros for it. But what it does is it gives you a number of false choice questions, and you fill it in and it tells you which ones of these you prefer to use. Now, bear in mind that preferences are things that you can change because they are only preferences. But if, for instance, your job is to sell aggressively day in, day out, and you're very, very low on this, it's not to say you couldn't do it, but life will be very, very stressful. So if you had a highly accommodate profile and your organisation wanted you to be highly competitive, you could do it, but it'd be very stressful. Did that make sense? Yeah. Now, if you talk about what I see, particularly with supermarket buyers, because we're about to start doing some work with Sonai, and I've trained a lot of the supermarket buyers in the UK as well, and Lenta and various other in various other countries, is you see high compete, high compromise, right? So the way this goes, you go in to see them and they go, let's split the difference, right? So that's typically what happens. Now, the thing is, when you know that they're going to do that, what you can do is in the UK, we would say, put a book down your trousers while we do the first bit, while they're going like that, and then just make some ridiculous demand because they're going to try and split it down the middle. So if you can put up with this kind of behaviour, then you're probably going to win more often than you lose. Alice Clark?
Yeah.
Good.
You want to relate this to Brexit?
Okay. I think if we want to talk about Brexit, I think later on when we talk about people adjusting what people believe, if you look at, if you think about, I'm going to come back, I am actually going to come back to that, because, no, don't let me off the hook, I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to come back to that right now. Right. Now, the second thing is you need to plan properly. Now, there are 4 things you need to do when you plan for negotiations. If there had been a clock up there, I wouldn't have disrespected everyone and looked at my watch, but we've got a plane to catch at some point. 4 things you need to do. The first one is set your objectives. So decide what the point of the negotiation or the meeting is. And remember what I said a bit earlier, Rackham was saying advances, not continuances. It's a bit like when I was actually selling things as opposed to services and large lumps of hardware, customers would say, would you put some stuff in the post? Do you ever get that? Put some information in the post. Do you ever get that? And I would say, of course I will. What are you going to do with it? What do you want it for, specifically, so I can make sure you've got the right stuff? Because people say that to me, can you send me a presentation? Absolutely. I never say no, I say, absolutely. Specifically, what would you like me to highlight in that presentation? And when people used to say, can you send us samples when I was selling food products? What I would do is I'd never send them, because I know what happened when I was a buyer. I'd get them, they go straight in the bin, or the secretary would take them home. So what I'd do is I'd say, did you get the samples? I say, and they always say, oh yeah, we did. I think you couldn't have done because I didn't send them. right. And I think what's probably worth doing is every morning you should stand up and chant, buyers are liars, just to get your mind in the right place. That didn't work, did it? Right. So set the objectives. The second is identify what your alternatives are. Now, your power in negotiation is driven by the quality of your alternatives. Coming back to Brexit, or more accurately, what the other people consider or think your alternatives are, not what they are, what they think they are. And coming back to Brexit, we've got half-wits in Her Majesty's Kingdom who are saying things like, a no deal will never work for us. We have to get a deal. The one area we've got to negotiate here is to say, well, okay, we won't do a deal. If it gets too difficult, we won't do a deal. That is our only veto we've got, is not to do a deal, right? And we've got idiots, and then we've got Jeremy Corbyn coming over and having a little chat with his mate Barney. And so what you've got in the background is everybody is trying to undermine what's going on all the time. Juncker and Barney sit and think, come on. And they've got all their ducks in, we call it ducks in a row. They've got everything's lined up, isn't it? You now hate me because I'm from the UK, don't you? I can see that. And we're not, you're going to have to pay some more in because we're not going to pay any. Right. Identify the alternatives. The third thing is identify what's going to be variable. So this could be, I don't know, price, delivery times, payment terms. And you generally find the people that are more successful are the ones that have a wider range of variables, because otherwise you just end up haggling over the price. So it ends up being 5,000 euros for that, you must be crazy. You wouldn't give you a penny over 4,000, 4,500 and we've got a deal. And you end up with those sort of conversations. But you have to establish that two things are going to change at the same time, otherwise you just end up haggling and compromising. And the fourth thing is to set limits. So this is deciding what you're going to ask them for to start with, and at what point the deal stops working for you. Now, the way I look at this is we've got a position that we'd like to get. So that's what I'm going to ask them for to start with. The other party is going to do the same thing, and we've got a point that we must get. So south of that, the deal doesn't work for us. They're going to do the same thing. And our intention has to be to get them to the point at which they wouldn't concede anymore, but the deal's still acceptable. Their intention is to do the same to us, to get us down to the lowest possible price that we'd sell it to, but we'd still do the deal. At Harvard, they call this the aspiration base, which is nice. And they call this the reservation base. I know what you're thinking, that's really helpful. It helps people understand it, doesn't it? They call it a reservation. Okay, reservation base. So assuming our worst position and their worst position overlaps, at INSEAD they call this the ZOPA, the zone of potential agreement. I like to call it the overlap because I can remember that every time I talk about it. So assuming our worst position and their worst position overlaps, that's the area where an agreement might be made. Now, coming back to this, the two behaviours that are singly most successful in negotiation are collaboration and competing. Now, what you want to be doing is you want to be collaborating to make the deal as good as it can be for everybody, so there's no residual resentment after it. But you've absolutely got to compete to take your share of what's on offer, because any of this will be shared between you. So you have to do some competing as well. Now, coming back to what you said earlier about tell them what you want first. Was that, did you say that? Something like that?
It's something like that. It's about kind of making, being able to also make the first offer.
Yes, that's that was exactly. So there are some, I would call it putting a stake in the ground, right? And there are some people that would say, rule number one in negotiation, never name your price first, right? They could not be more wrong. If you imagine, if we're negotiating and I've decided I'm going to start there and you've decided you're going to start there and I've got my stake in the ground first, how many times have you heard yourself thinking, what I was going to ask for was a bit optimistic, maybe I better move towards them? Anybody ever done that, or is that just me? Yeah, it's just us. The rest of them probably got friends that have done it, right? But the converse is also true. If we put the stake in the ground first, they may get dragged towards us, which means that the midpoint shifts up, because the negotiation usually ends up plus or minus 10% of the midpoint. So the more you ask for, the more you get. Now, the reason people give me for not wanting to put a stake in the ground first is they'll say things like, they might have offered us more. Really? Your planning is so poor, they might have offered you more than you would have asked them for. The issue there is probably your planning. Or the other thing that they say, which I have a certain amount of sympathy for, is that it can have what I would call a freezing effect. So you say, we want to charge you that, and they just go, no. And so then you think, oh no, what am I going to do? What am I going to do now, right? And so I have some sympathy for that. But what Rackham found in his research is the skilled negotiators would give the rationale or an explanation of their position, yet followed by the stake in the ground. What the average negotiators do, they do it the other way round. They say, we want to charge you €50,000 for this because, now the problem is, as soon as you said, we want to charge you €50,000 for this, they've stopped listening. They're not interested in your rationale for it. But the other thing about this is, if you give them the rationale and put the stake in the ground and then just go, no, you can say, well, I've explained to you why our position is what it is. If you've got an alternative position, I'll be really happy to listen to it. Right? And that's what makes it so powerful. Now, I get, particularly when I'm selling negotiation, nobody ever wants to think that they're rubbish negotiators when they're up against me. So it makes my job a lot harder. And people say things to me like, is that your best price? What are they expecting me to say? No, I inflated it by 5% because I knew you were going to ask me. It's just a stupid question to ask, isn't it? So what I tend to do is I always say things like, well, under current circumstances, as I understand them, yes. The implication being that if I haven't understood the circumstances properly, then maybe it's negotiable. Or another one somebody said to me is that negotiable? I thought, oh God, I lie. I said, yeah. I said, what were you looking for? 90, 100 days consultancy a year? Well, no, about 5. Oh, no. Right. But the thing is, I think one thing that people that are selling don't do very well is they don't think about what I would call the rabbit in a headlight questions, right? You know, when you go in to see the customer and you think, I hope they don't ask me that, please don't ask me that, don't ask me that, and they always do, don't they? I mean, they always ask you those questions. And it's only a question of rehearsal. When I got into this, because British people don't like talking about money. I've got over that reticence now, but British people don't like talking about money. And the question I never wanted to be asked is, how much do you charge? Because you've got to look them in the eye, haven't you? Because if you looks like you don't believe it, don't expect them to believe it either. So I used to practice in front of a mirror. I used to, For corporate clients, I charge them, you're a tiger. Right. So I just used to get used to that. And I went to see one lady. She ran, she was a HR director of a trade association. And she said, well, how much do you charge? So I told her, and she said, well, that's a lot, isn't it? I thought, Steve, you're a pro, right? I said, pause, don't start arguing straight away, pause. I don't know, what are you comparing it with? And she said, well, our other trainers. So, okay. I said, they ever been on the board of a public company? Do they do stuff that always delivers to the bottom line? Or do they do stuff like time management and stuff? I wasn't quite that dismissive, but that was like the bottom line. She said, well, they do stuff like time management. Okay, well, I guess if I did stuff like that, then I'd be a lot cheaper. But what I do always delivers a benefit, always. And then it went away. But a lot of the time, people try to negotiate with you because they think they're supposed to, not because they necessarily expect you to give them anything. So that's just part of the game. So I've got 2 golden rules for negotiation, but I'm going to come to them later. Not much later, obviously. Right. So, and I've got 4 rules for putting a stake in the ground. And the first rule is put the stake in the ground early. The second is firmly, right? So we don't want about 50,000 euro, around 50,000 euro, something in the region of 50,000 euro. We want 50,000 euro. And then the next thing to do is shut up. So many people say, well, what we want is we want 50,000 euro. How does that sound? What are your thoughts? How do you feel about that? Right? If you look like you don't believe it, don't expect them to buy it either. And the fourth is, if you can, put it in writing. So I would guess most of you, when you do presentations to customers where money's involved, potential customers where money's involved, there will be a proposal with money on it, wouldn't there?
Yes.
Yeah. And so what happens then is the conversation polarises around your written proposal rather than what they've suggested. Agreed? That's probably what happens? Right. Shut up. Oh yeah, and so once you put your stake in the ground, you don't move until they've put a stake in the ground, right? Because otherwise they'll say things like, it's not good enough, so you move it. And then what would they say?
Not good enough.
Correct. And then what would they say? And they just carry on doing that, carry on doing, and you can't do it. And you just have to establish that nothing's for nothing. Any questions so far? Or are you thinking that is so comprehensive, Steve?
Why in writing? I didn't understand that.
Agreed. That's generally the seller makes a written proposal, and then the buyer, because they haven't done any planning, then argues with that. But it anchors your position much, much more firmly. It also stops you saying around something in the region of, it's just exact. So my counsel would be, if you learn nothing more for today, early, firmly, shut up and put it in writing. Number 3, understand the decision-making process. Now, what used to happen is you go and see somebody and they will be, that you would actually go and see the decision maker and a decision will be made based on how well you'd actually managed to persuade them. Agreed? That's what used to happen just after the war. That's what used to happen. Now, there's various sort of decision-making structures. Occasionally, you still get one person that's decision maker. I guess in your instances, if you're the big cheese in your company, you could be the ultimate decision maker. Sometimes you'll have like a horizontal chain. So there'll be one person will consult with a colleague or consult. So that could be the procurement, could be consulting with the technical officer, could be talking to finance, depending on how it was going to be financed. Sometimes you have a vertical chain, which goes like that, where one person then has to refer it to their boss, who then refers it to their boss. Or you could have a combination of those where these 3 people would then put a proposal to the people to go up the chain. Or you can have a spider's web where people have to consult various people before the decision's made. Or you can have the public sector, which is completely random. I have absolutely no idea how they make decisions. And to be honest, if I could figure that out, I probably wouldn't be here. I'd be retired and I'd be in the Bahamas. Right. So my question for you is, are you really clear how the decision's going to be made? And what I used to do early on in my career, I'd always say to people, are you the decision maker? And what would they always say to me? Yeah, yeah. And then about 6 weeks later, I'd be really, really disappointed when I found out they weren't. And why would they always say yes? Because it's an ego question. Now, if I said to you, could you just quickly explain to me what the decision-making process is in this organisation? They won't, sometimes they'll just say, I make the decisions, but they're more likely to tell you how it works. Agree with that? Right. So, how are the decisions made, not who's the decision maker. Now, what I use is, to try and figure it out, I try and think who I know in the organisation, and they fulfil one of 4 roles for me. Right. And the mnemonic is care, which is nice, isn't it? Right. Not really. So the first one is the coach. Now, this is somebody that's telling me what's going on in the organisation that maybe I did or maybe I didn't ought to know. This is not normally the person that you go and see, because they're very, very, the word I want to use is guarded. Is guarded okay? They play it close to their chest. They won't tell you all the stuff that's going on. Then there's somebody that approves, APP, that can approve the deal. So that's probably the ultimate decision maker. Then there's someone who's responsible. That's the person who often tells you they're the decision maker, but would certainly communicate the decision to you, whatever it was. And there's some people that are responsible for executing it. Typically, if you're in tech, this will be like the technical officers or the IT director or something like that. So these are sort of like the business prevention department. And I then use what's called, I don't know whether multi-attribute utility table translates very well into Portuguese. I'm assuming it's not, but I'll explain it anyway. So what I do is I draw up this map, and I think, who do I know? What's their job? Do they fulfil one of those 4 criteria? How influential are they on a decision? I usually rate it from 0 to 3. And what's my relationship? -4 means they don't like me very much at all. +4 means they think I'm a genius. And then you multiply them together. So I'll give you the example. This is a company I used to deal with, and you'll see why in a minute, used to deal with in Ireland. I used to know their chief executive really, really well. He'd phone me up, he'd ask me stuff about what's going on in the marketplace and everything else. But because of the consultancy I was doing is so far down the chain, the chance of him intervening if it all went wrong is virtually 0. I know him well, he likes me, but he does sort of broad concepts and strategic planning and what the impact is of Brexit. He's not interested in who's doing the negotiation consultancy. So his influence on it, to my mind, was 0. If I got kicked out, could I have got him to intervene? Possibly, but it's unlikely because it's not a high enough macro decision. But he thought I was a genius. But of course, 0 times +4 is still 0. Then there was a lady there called Sonia. She was a commercial director. She was the one that said, Jones is doing all the negotiation consultancy. Is there anything that's unclear? Right. And she was a 3, and she thought I was great as well. Can you see a pattern emerging? And then, right, there was a guy called Peter. He was a buying director. Now, on the face of it, it didn't look like he had much influence in the decision, but he'd been there a long time. So people would defer to him, and they'd talk to him about anything like this. And he was a guy that I used to schmooze. Do you schmooze, does that translate into Portuguese? He was the one that I used to take out for dinner when I went over there. So he'd give me loads and loads of information that maybe I should have, maybe I shouldn't. But indirectly, he had a lot of influence on what was going on. So you see, I was well like that. And then there was this lady who was the HR director, right? And she thought I was a half-wit. She absolutely hated me, but she was very, very influential. So what you've got there is she thought I was an idiot. And so you add them all up, and that comes to +12. Now, fairly obviously, when you look at this analysis, I've got one particular issue here. If this lady goes, I'm toast. And she did go, and I was indeed toast. If I wasn't so competitive, what I probably would have done is bit my tongue and spent more time trying to make sure that this lady didn't think, as a minimum, didn't think I was a complete idiot, but I didn't like her. So my suggestion to you is, if you're trying to get business, have a written description of how the decisions are made and do some sort of analysis like that. If you've got one customer where your business is dependent on them, you need to be, well, in England we call it all over them like a rash.
Question. Where would a gatekeeper, a non-functional gatekeeper, sit? I'm thinking of people who may still influence the decision, may still even, it's really risky to deal with Steve. They're not really part
No, they wouldn't think that. I'd put them probably in there, in the execute.
Maybe they will, so they can influence Sonia. Maybe they don't really care who you are, but they will say to Sonia, well, it's really risky, but Sonia, if you give me some budget for something else, then I might have a different opinion about Steve.
I mean, it's only really a model. I'm sure there's other models and some of them are better and some of them are worse. What I try and do is think, how little work can I do to get the best possible outcome? And this has always worked for me. And I know other people call them gatekeepers, and there's another one model which is facer. There's hundreds of them. There's probably as many models as there is days in the year. But I would say this person is probably the gatekeeper. These are the people that stop it. Right. Now, alter the balance of power before it's too late. Has anybody read Robert Cialdini's book, The Power of Influence and Persuasion? It's a must read. You must read this. It's really, really interesting. And he said that the mistake most people make is they think that people do what is in their best interest, but they don't. What the actual psychological research is, people do what damages them least. Right? So it's not what they stand to gain, it's more what they stand to lose by not doing what you've asked them to do. Do you get? But typically when we're talking to customers, we tell them about how great it's going to be, not how bad it's going to be if they don't do it, or what's going to happen if one of their competitors works with us and they then they end up in a better position in the marketplace. So I think about what they stand to lose. Now, I was working with a company that was manufacturing a wide range of grocery products, and they were trying to get their prices up in one of the major retailers in the UK. And I said, right, you need to try to alter what they believe. So tell me what they threaten you with, because that gives you an indication of what it is that they believe. Because if they threaten you, they think that's going to have an impact on you. So I said, well, what they keep threatening us with, they keep saying they won't take our price increases, right? They won't pay it. I said, right, well, that means they believe that you won't stop supplying them, right? Because otherwise they don't set the prices, you set the prices, they decide whether they buy it. It's as simple or as complex as that. I said, what else do they threaten you with? So they said, well, what they threaten us with is they threaten us with, in England, we call it the towel. And so it's the Pareto principle. So if the retailer buys 100 different products, of those 100 different products, the last 80 only account for 20% of the volume. You've come across this Pareto principle? So they keep threatening to kick out our tail. So that's what they call it, the products that don't sell as well, the tail. So, okay. So they think that they can kick out the tail and nothing will change, or it will damage you more than it will damage them. Correct, it will. I said, no, that's what they believe. We don't want them to believe that. It may be true, we want them to believe other things. So I said, right, they don't believe you'll stop supply. So you need to provide them with a proof of where you've stopped supplying. And what had happened is they had two parts of their business. One was retail and the other was food service. And they'd stopped supplying the biggest food service customer because they wouldn't take the price increase. And so I said, go in and explain, I won't tell you which retailer it was, go in and explain to them what happened. Because what that's telling them is, under certain extreme circumstances, you would just stop supplying, you'd cease supplying them. Okay, we'll do that. I said, right, now the next thing you need to do is you need to persuade them that these lower volume products are so high on certain consumers' radar that if you don't sell them, then they'll go somewhere else to buy all of their shopping rather than just that one. So if for instance, it was the 226mm upside down tomato ketchup with extra organic tomatoes in or something like that, people over the age of 65 who have a massive disposable income will go somewhere else to buy that. So what you need to do is get your marketing department to do some research and go in and just show them research. Don't talk about anything else. Don't threaten them. Don't explain what the context is, but just kind of say, we got this information. I thought it was really, really interesting. I just want to come and share it with you. So that's the second thing to do. And the other thing you need to do is persuade them that this tail contributes disproportionately to the amount of money that you invest with that particular customer. Does that make sense? Okay, so what you're saying is, what most retailers believe is they punch you and that's an end to the fight. There's no escalation of the conflict. So what you've got to persuade them is, yes, okay, they can take out 20% of the volume of the products, but that will take 40% of the 40% of the investment away. Does that make sense? So if, for instance, they got, if they had £10 million of investment, they would be expecting that if they took 20% of the products out, they'd still have £8 million of investment. You've got to persuade them it's 6. So they went in and did a presentation about, they called these legacy brands. Let me explain our P&L. We've got these frontline brands, not quite so profitable. We've got these legacy brands that contribute disproportionately. Legacy brands equals they don't sell. So if you want to persuade them and alter the balance of power, you need to do it before the negotiation. Were you just stretching? Okay, carry on, carry on. I sometimes worry when people breathe. It always makes me a bit edgy. Right. And the fifth one was, you've got to understand the rules of the game, and I'm going to just go through a couple of these key ones. The golden rule is don't negotiate, persuade. Right? Most people think, right, the customer's pushed back, so we need to negotiate. Have at least one go at trying to persuade them they should pay you what it is you've asked for, because you've thought about it to start with. You've got a decent rationale for it, explain it again to them, and then negotiate if you don't think you're going to get it. And the other golden rule is nothing's for nothing, right? If you start making unilateral concessions for which you get nothing in return, they're going to expect you to carry on doing it. I've got a few other little rules. You need to sequence the agenda properly. This is in terms of negotiation rather than selling. You think about what happens if this is concessions and this is time. Typically, you get a curve like that. So if somebody's able to put a deadline for the negotiation, all the concessions are made in about the last 10% of the time that's available. So if this is 3 months, that'll be in week 12. If this is an hour, that'll be in the last 5 or 10 minutes of the conversation. So what I try and do is I try and start off with something where we're likely to get agreement reasonably quickly, because it's sort of, it sets the right tone for the negotiation. And then I want my most important thing there, and I want to try to constrain their most important thing to be done at the end, so they're under pressure to make concessions rather than me. Typically that isn't what we do. We tend to let the customers get their important stuff out first. Don't accept the first offer. Negotiators expect to negotiate. The clue's in the title. When I first left WH Smith's, I started doing coaching, and I got a phone call from an advertising agency in London, and they're rich, aren't they, advertising agencies? Would you agree? Yeah, I mean, you look at the cars they drive, where they go for lunch and everything else. Anyway, so the HR director phoned me up and she said, we've got rid of this guy and we think we may have unfairly dismissed him. I said, oh, what happened then? Well, he was rubbish, so we got rid of him. She said, well, but did you give him warnings and everything else? No. So, okay, did you replace him? Yeah. So the person that you replaced him with, what are they doing? Well, same job that Matthew was doing. Okay, any other context? Yeah, Matthew had a leased car, so we're giving him Matthew's car, and we put him in Matthew's office. He said, yep, I reckon you're probably right. That's not a bad assessment. I think you probably have unfairly dismissed him. She said, yeah, I thought you'd say that. And he keeps saying, it's about the principle, and we think it's about the money. I said, I think you might be right there. Usually it's about the money, not the principle, unless he's very, very wealthy. So she said, well, we reckon if we chuck him some cash and you do some coaching, some massage his ego a little bit, we think the problem will go away. So I thought, okay, I'll go down and see her. So I thought this piece of work was worth to me, I don't know, 3,000, maybe 4,000 euro, no more than that. So I went down to see her and I said, so when you got rid of Matthew, how much was he earning? She said, about 200,000 a year. I said, okay. I said, normally violates my firmly rule, but listen where I'm going. Normally, we charge 10% of the annual salary. Pause. She said, well, we're going to have to cap it at 12 grand. There is a God, right? Now, at this point, if I'd said, all right, how would she have felt? She'd have felt that she'd been, well, we call it stitched up. And she would have thought, oh no. So what I did is I sat there for about 5 minutes. I said, no, let me just explain why it's index linked. He's going to want access to all the expensive databases. He won't agree to meet me in hotel foyers. He's going to want meeting rooms every time we meet. He'll be all over me. He'll absorb so much of my time. And then I saw her eyes starting to close. And I thought, no, Steve, don't talk yourself out of this one, because this is quite a good one. And she said, and I said, well, if you agree it's not a precedent, we'll go along with it. And she grinned from ear to ear. And I'm thinking, Steve, you're the man, right? And I was trying to look fed up all through this, thinking, don't talk yourself out of this one. And I walked out of their offices in Soho Square. And if I could have clicked my heels together walking down the road, I would have done that, but I didn't. So I went into the Mayfair champagne bar and I bought a bottle of Krug and I drank it all myself. Because I haven't got any friends. That's what happens if you're in retail for a long time. Right, frame questions, if you specific, then we vague. So would you help me with this one? Would you say to me, if you reduce your prices by 5%, we'll give you all of our business. Just repeat that. Shall I try again? Yeah. If you reduce your prices by 5%, then we'll give you all of our business.
What's your business?
No, it doesn't matter. It's just, no, if you just repeat that.
Would you like me to repeat?
Yes, please. If you
reduce by 5% the price, I would give you my business.
Okay, did you get that? Right, do it the other way around. I'll give you all the business. Now let me finish. I like it that you're excited and engaged. I like that. Right. I'll give you all the business if you reduce the price by 5%.
I'll give you all my business.
That's fantastic. That really will help with our production plan and everything else. So here's the problem. If they interrupt you, they've already banked what you've offered them, and you then find it hard to attach your conditions to it. So it's if you specific, then we vague. So better will be, if you reduce your prices by 5%, then we'll consider giving you all of the business. So what you're doing is you're making your proposal clear and what they might get in return a bit more vague. Okay with that? So you're anchoring your position. Practice arguments we talked about, non-personal boundaries. Our budget is anything which suggests it's not your decision. What I find, there's a lady called Linda Babcock who's written a book called The Shadow Negotiation, which is about the difference in the ways that men and women negotiate. And she said that typically women say we and men say I. Now bear in mind this is based on a US study, so it may be different in the rest of Europe, I don't know. But if you think about it, if I said to you, well, I'm not going to agree to that, his immediate response is, well, who do I need to speak to then? Right? Because I'm personalising it. I'm making this an ego game. I'm saying I have decided, even if it's not me, even if it's the organisation's decided. Don't just whinge about stuff. Tell them what you want. So you see this often in customer service situations where people will go in and they'll be angry with what's happened, and they'll go and say to people, well, what will you give me, right? Well, tell them what you want. I had a great situation where we used to get home deliveries from Tesco and they messed it up 2 days running. And I made the manager ring me back, and the delivery was worth about €90. And he said, well, what would you like me to do to compensate you? I said, I'd like you to give me the delivery free. Right. Now, he's got a real problem because he's asked me to propose a solution. What's he going to do? Haggle with me for 10 or 20 euro? He should never have asked. He should have said, we'll give you half of it free, or we'll give you €50 credit or €20 credit or anything. But he made it difficult. So don't let them make the proposal, you make the proposal. Don't split the difference. Splitting the difference, which is haggling behaviour. If you start at 6 and I start at 10 and I say split the difference, which is 8, yep. Right. Now, obviously this is just compromising. A better way of doing this is if we're negotiating and I say, and you're at 6, I'm at 10, and you say split the difference, and say, and then what I would then say is, so what you're saying then is we should settle at 8. Is that correct? Which he would say, yes. Well, we can't settle at 8, but what we're prepared to settle at 7, right? So what you do is you anchor them to their proposal and accept it as what I would call a unilateral concession, a concession for nothing in return. I get away with this, I reckon, about 1 in 3 times. It's always worth a try. Don't use or respond to threats. There's 2 sorts of threats. There's explicit threats and implicit threats. An explicit threat is, if you don't do this, I'm going to do that. And I'll give you 2 examples. The first one is, if you don't give us a 5% price reduction, we're going to stop doing business with you on Friday, right? That's threat number 1. Threat number 2 is, if you don't reduce your price by 5%, then I'm going to review all the business we do with you, and on Monday, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. Which is the most menacing, or the most scary? The direct threat or the implied threat? The implied threat. The explicit threat could be more menacing if you knew every time they threatened you they did it, and they'd done it at least once before, so you know they're prepared to do it. But generally people don't like not knowing, so implicit threats are better than explicit threats generally. And the last thing is, don't use round numbers. Now, if I said to you, I'll run all your negotiation programs for you, and I'll charge you €100,000. If we start to negotiate, what do you think, what would be the size of movements I'm going to make? 5 grand, 10 grand at a time, 5,000, 10,000? If I said it's €101,276, what would you think? Oh, if I get the €1,276, not if I've had a bit of a result. So don't use round numbers. What it also says is, it suggests that you've thought about it. So when you're pitching stuff to customers, don't use round numbers. That's all I've got to say, really. Yeah. So.
Perfect. We still have 15 minutes or so.
Okay.
So questions. Okay, these guys are professionals. You should be prepared.
Yeah, I got a question about something specific that happened to me not very long ago, negotiating with a big corporation, a big hotel chain. And on the presentation I was showing, they were very interested. We already knew that we were doing something with them. And at the end he said, can you send me that presentation without the other hotels that you are working with? And my question on my head at the moment was, should it, because we put the customers we are working with to prove that we are already working with big companies.
Oh, okay.
So it's like a catch-22, like I don't know if I should put examples of big companies in the same market.
Well, it depends what you're doing. I mean, if you're giving them confidential information, you shouldn't do that because there's a competition in there. But
like confidential, just the names of the
yeah, but is it in the public domain? So the product you're selling, I saw, look, I've probably got one of those in my garage. But with those products, could I go into another hotel chain and see them there? Okay, so that's public domain information. No reason why you shouldn't share that. It's not confidential information. No reason why you shouldn't.
What I mean is negotiating terms. Like he asked me specifically, send me that presentation, but I don't want to see the other hotels that you are working with.
Why is it an issue?
I don't know. It's like
he might have been on a compliance training course where they've said you must not ask questions about what our competitors are doing. I was running a compliance session for Dr. Urtke, you know, the pizza people, last week, and they're red hot on it. Oh, you know, any emails they send out have to have a disclaimer on the bottom about retail pricing and everything else, and people are just running a bit scared. And it's just, I mean, what they don't want is they don't want people making illegal agreements that are against the consumer interest, but people are just getting a little bit too touchy about it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but did you notice the way I danced around it? That was quite professional, wasn't it? Any other questions?
When you are dealing with someone and then all of a sudden they just disappear. What do? You send them.
What, have you killed them? Or no?
The contact, they are not at your reach, so you contact them by phone or email, and then you send information and you wait for a while, which is reasonable, but then you.
Well,
what do? Is it polite to ask them, well, do you want to keep talking or not?
well, I read a book. I've forgotten the name of the author. It was called High Probability Selling, and it's like 400 pages. And so I'm going to save you the £10 I spent on it, right? Because it had one message: if they don't want what you've got now at the price you want to sell it for, they're low probability. And I thought, oh yeah. So the thing is, if they're not getting back to you, I'll just cross them off the list. There's a.
I do that, but do you? Is it polite to say, well, do you want to continue the conversation?
Well, I'd ask them.
Let's assume.
No, I would say, look, if the answer's no, no's okay. Yeah, it'll be a bit disappointing, but I'll get over it reasonably quickly. But like the man with the jam now, I just get going back and back. It cost me a fortune in petrol and in jam as well. Any other questions?
What I would typically do for a situation like that is just, if it's an email used, I will send an email saying, I understand you're busy, and probably my value proposition is not that of interest for you right now. Whatever you think it could be a good match, let me know. So you can actually get back to them and say, I heard that you were acquired or something like that. It's probably now a good time for us to follow up on the last conversation. So you have a trigger that you can use to get back on track.
Sometimes closing the door.
I have a question. Can you live with the consequence of missing the plane?
No, I can't. I've got dinner booked at 8 o'clock, so Mrs. Jones would have. Well, I wouldn't. I'd be through the second Mrs. Jones if I missed dinner this evening. So. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, it's great to meet you all.
Thank you.